Hello, so today's video is all about the Canon 85mm 1.8 EF lens. Now this is a lens that I've been using unbelievably for nearly 17 years in my life as a professional photographer, and I thought I'd just share some of my experiences of using it and talk about some of the good things and some of the bad things about this lens. So it's a nice small prime. 85mm is a great focal length for portrait photography, and f1.8 is a great wide open aperture for a prime lens. Now I'm talking about this in terms of full frame cameras, by the way. This is one of the first lenses that I bought for my first full frame digital SLR, and these days I shoot it on my Canon 5D Mark IV. If you're thinking about this lens for a crop sensor camera, then you'll have to do your own maths in terms of the focal length magnification and the implications on the aperture. So nice small unit, which is very important to me because I tend to use these things in association with my holy trinity of zoom lenses from Canon. So that's what I'll typically carry, those three zoom L lenses for most of my work. They'll do most of the heavy lifting. And then I'll carry a few primes as well, just for when that kind of 85mm or 50mm wide open thing presents an opportunity. So it's important for me that they're kind of compact and relatively light, and I guess relatively cost effective as well. Now, okay, so 85mm, 8 blade aperture, so you get really nice bokeh out of focus, looking kind of background or foreground if that's what you're going for. Really good build quality. There's no weather sealing. This was even before weather sealing, I think, on this lens. But it's been bomb-proof for me. Absolutely rugged and tough, no issues at all. Some of these kind of smallish, plasticky Canon primes tend to have a few build quality issues and can be a bit graunchy on the focus and all of those things. But this thing's been, for me, in my experience, has been absolutely fine. I think this is one of the early ones, so it's got this kind of shiny plastic. I think some of the later ones have got a kind of more matte plastic body. And there's not really a lot going on the lens. There's no image stabilization. We'll get to that in a minute. There's just a manual and AF switch for your focus, but the focusing ring is nice and smooth and is kind of always on. I use back button focus, so you always have nice smooth manual focus if you want it. All of the focusing mechanism is internal, so there's no moving parts on the lens when you're focusing, and it's relatively quiet. I mean, I don't know if you can hear this. You know, it's plastic on plastic, so it does make a little bit of a noise, but there's certainly more, certainly much noisier lenses out there. It's nice that nothing moves. And it has a nice big wide open you know, front element, and that's it. There's nothing more to say about the lens really. It's relatively compact for its size, and that really helps me out in the way that I work, because it will typically fit in a pocket if I need it to, or sort of gets lost in the camera bag without really adding too much extra weight, or I can just put it on a pouch if I want to on my belt. And you know, that's a big advantage to me over some of the much more expensive Canon L prime lenses like the 85 1.4 or 1.2, which I know a lot of people use, and everyone will have their different opinions about these things, but for me they've always been a bit expensive and very big and very heavy. And so I have used them. I've used most of them quite extensively over the years, but I've always kind of gravitated back to owning and using certainly for the 85mm range, always back to this one. So what's good about it? Well, it's sharp. You know, even at f1.8, it's super sharp, and as you stop down, it becomes super sharp. Very little distortion. You know, I don't think anyone, I'm not a technical kind of lens chart kind of person, but I don't think anybody would be able to argue that it's not a sharp lens. It has lovely bokeh out of focus areas. And it's very handy, you know, and it's relatively cheap. I think you can pick up a used one for about £150 that's a bit battered maybe, ranging up to sort of, I think new, they're about £350, which is really a lot cheaper than some of the other 85mm primes from Canon, certainly the L range. And okay, on to some negatives. So the first thing is the minimum focus distance, and this is something that's always really bugged me about this lens. It's better, the minimum focus distance on the 1.8 is better than on the 85L lenses. So that's an advantage, I guess, but it's still not quite close enough for me. It's always been ever so slightly too far. It's been really annoying. And you can get, it's not a deal breaker, because you just learn that you can just kind of take half a step back and then you'll definitely be within the range and everything's cool. And you can always throw one of these extenders on if you want to, but that kind of brings its own problems. The next problem is that it does have fringing, particularly wide open, and I like to shoot these lenses wide open. I see that as the main reason to use them, to shoot them wide open, and there is fringing, and it can be a problem. Particularly in sunlight or contrasty light, you tend to get this purple fringing around the area that's sharp. This can be a characteristic of most fast primes, but this lens definitely has it. It's purple and green, and it can be around the area that's sharp, and it can also be in the areas that are out of focus in the foreground and background, and it can change colour from purple to green. You can fix it in post-production in Lightroom. It's a really easy fix, relatively easy fix, and I'm sure some of the other software packages do it as well. You can fix it. It can be annoying if you've got a lot of pictures to do. You know, everyone will have to make their own mind up, because in some ways it's become almost, for me, it's almost become a character element of the lens rather than a potential huge negative. And so I kind of know it, I know it's going to be there, I expect it, I plan for it, I work with it, and I either zap it in Lightroom or I just let it roll if that kind of works for that particular picture. But for some people it might be a problem. Also, it vignettes quite significantly at f1.8, and you know, I like a bit of vignette. It saves me adding it in post-production. I like a nice vignette. Some people won't. Everyone has different opinions about these things. All of these things are just subjective. Let me know your thoughts, by the way. You know, leave a comment. I love to hear from everybody, and thank you everybody for all of your other comments on other videos. It's very much appreciated. Okay, and all of the fringing and the vignetting all diminish as you stop down. So if you go from f1.8 to 2.8, it improves a bit, and then at f4 it's improved a lot, and then by 5.6 it's gone. And also the sharpness is supreme at 5.6. Which leads me on to the next issue, I guess, with this lens, and that is that it does have ever so slightly lazy autofocus. But here's the thing, shooting at wide open at 1.8 on an 85mm lens on a full frame camera is tricky to get right, to get the pictures sharp. You have to have your technique down, and you need to be aware of movement. You need to be aware of how thin the field of focus is. It's really tiny. And so from a user perspective, a lot of the time it can be user error that leads to getting out of focus pictures if shooting this lens wide open, and I get it wrong all the time. I tend to use this Zacuto Z Finder with the live view on the 5D Mark IV, so that I can zoom in using the live view to make sure that I've got sharp focus if I'm shooting wide open. But also you can just take precaution of just making sure, you know, just take extra special care with it when shooting wide open. That's pretty much standard for all fast primes, to be perfectly honest. But the lazy focus, it does have ever so slightly lazy focus, particularly if shooting into the light. And what I mean by that is that you could be shooting a portrait and you could have your AF point directly over the subject's eye, and yet the camera just, it looks sharp because it's quite deceptive, because you're looking at a picture that is telephoto with a narrow depth of field, so anything that is close to sharp will look pretty sharp, so it's a bit deceptive, but the focus just will not lock on. And sometimes I've sworn that everything was sharp, and yet it's just all a bit soft, and so you need to treat that with caution. Again, it's a bit like the fringing, that if you can work around that and understand the nature of it, then you will work with the lens and you will understand its weaknesses and you will make it work. But it's worth knowing, if you're considering this lens or have an interest in this lens, it's worth knowing that the AF can be ever so slightly kind of tricky around that, around the actual purpose that you absolutely need it for, which is nailing sharp focus on the eyes. But so long as you're aware of it, you can deal with it. Okay, and then this leads me on to the next thing, is that it has no image stabilization, which for me, coming from the old school, is not so much of a problem. I always still use the rule of, you know, whatever your focal length is, you don't drop your shutter speed below that at all if you want sharp pictures. So you know, using that rule, you wouldn't go below sort of 100th of a second. But with this lens, I think that's even a bit risky. I think that because you've got no image stabilization, I think I've had problem with camera shake with this lens, if I go anywhere near 60th of a second, I know that I'm going to get camera shake. If I don't shoot, 125th would be the lowest that I would go, and I would want it to be a little bit faster than that ideally, which is kind of okay because you've got the 1.8 aperture, so you can get those faster shutter speeds, but it's just worth bearing in mind if you're used to an image stabilized lens being able to shoot down to crazy low speeds, this ain't one of those, and it's going to be difficult. This is one of those lenses where it will test your technical skill. And so in summary, it's an incredible lens to have if you wanting to shoot portraits or wanting to shoot pictures where you have very minimum depth of field and lots of out of focus in the foreground and background. And I use it primarily for portraits, but it can be used for all sorts of different things. There's no limitation really. It's a great lens for that, and it can really change a scene. You know, if you have a picture that you know, you really want to bring attention to the eyes, you know, there's nothing better than one of these, because you can just throw everything else can go to mush and you know, into bokeh with a little bit of fringing probably, but you know, you can really achieve great effects with this, and you can change a scene from the mundane into the extraordinary and beautiful. It has a really nice feel about it as well, even with all of those problems of a bit of fringing and, you know, problems to get it completely sharp, wide open, and a little bit of vignetting and maybe not being able to get close enough. Even with all of those things, it does have a nice feel. So there we are, the 85mm 1.8. Let me know your thoughts if you know you have anything to say about these lenses or considering getting one. I always love hearing from people and hearing different people's opinions and experiences of using these things. And there we go. So I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll be back soon with something more. If you've got any ideas for videos, you know, let me know, because I'm always interested to hear from people. And thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.